Hello and welcome to another BenCode Swift programming tutorial here. And today we're going to be talking about how we're going to transition from Playground and sort of raw Swift into the app development sort of structure and sort of workflow. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to open Xcode and you're going to create a new project, not a new Playground, because this time we're going to be actually creating an app project. So when you do that, you're going to see a list of various types, and what you're going to want to do is select the single view type. Obviously, there are applicable uses for other types, but because this is the first tutorial, we're going to be sticking to the basics. Once you select that first type, you're going to see this window that's open right here. In the product name, you're going to basically name your app. So for this one, we can put, we're going to put Hello World. Okay. And then the organization name, it doesn't matter. I'll put BenCode Swift. Whatever your obviously organization is, so I can go net.bencodeswift.hello, whatever. And generally you want some sort of TLD or top-level domain, before the organization identifier. So generally, if this would be your domain name with your TLD here, and then that's how you would do it. But it's really not as important as it might seem. Obviously, you're going to select Swift as your language, not Objective-C. And devices, for this one, we're going to be selecting a universal device. Just for this one, there are times in which you'll probably only want to use one or the other, specifically if you're using functions only available in one, but for now we're going to be using a universal one. We're not going to necessarily need core data. So once you can do that, you can select where you're going to create it. You can, as you see, you can create a JIT repository. We're not going to really get into what JIT is here, but it's a type of version control software. So you can basically push your code to a version control system, and you can revert to old versions and branch things off and stuff like that. But I recommend looking up a JIT tutorial for how that works, if that's what you're looking for, because it's a pretty complicated system in and of itself. But there's nothing wrong with creating a local JIT repository and letting Xcode handle that for you. That's fine. So, as you can see, once you do that, it's going to open up to this window, and this is basically the general settings of the app. So as you see, this is where you set your version. For instance, every time you're going to update your app in the App Store, you need to change the new version. So generally you go 1.0 to 1.0.1.2.3, and so on. Obviously the first version, so we're going to be doing 1.0. You can select a deployment target, which is the minimum version that a device is going to need to run to be able to use your app. This is important because if you use things that are only available in newer versions of the software, you're going to need to set that deployment target correctly. Here you can also change your device, but I would strongly recommend not doing that afterwards. Okay, and then you can obviously select your device orientation for how you want it to rotate. So for instance, if you wanted it only to be straight up, you would probably select portrait and upside down. And you would not put it in landscape because it will auto-rotate to these. And you can select a status bar style. Personally, I like to hide the status bar for the most part, but for this one, I'll leave it light. Okay, so if you look on your left-hand side of the screen, this is going to be all of your files. So it's your file library. So as you can see, you've got a .swift file here for Hello World tests. These are, various ways of testing certain things, but for now we're not going to be talking about the testing files. You've got info.plist, which is just sort of raw information that comes from the main settings up top. You've got a launch screen.xib, which we're going to be calling a nib file. NIB is how we're going to be pronouncing it, but it is XIB. And basically, this is what it's going to show before your app launches into the content. So this is, once you hit the icon, this comes up. In the meanwhile, something else is going on. So for instance, you can throw a activity indicator view here and start it as soon as it goes up if you want, and it'll, sort of, can't change the size, but it'll make sure that it gets going. So I can hit animating and so on. Yeah, you go large white and various things like that. On your right is all of your properties underneath the little slider tab. It's called the Attributes Inspector, as you can see. And basically this will give you, for whatever sort of element you're clicking on, it will give you the properties that you need to accurately create that object. So for instance, as you can see right now, I'm on an activity indicator view, which is basically the spinning gray wheel. You can change the color, obviously. So start large white, and I'll change the color to a light gray. And that's how I'll make it a bigger size. And, there's other things like that, too. Once I click the background, I can change the background color if I really wanted to and stuff like that. But for now, we're going to leave this as is, and we're going to head over to the viewcontroller.swift file. The viewcontroller.swift file. Well, we'll start with the app delegate, actually. So if you click on the app delegate.swift file, you'll see this. And this is basically the base functions of your app. You'll see there's a function for when the application did finish launching. So as soon as the application opens up all the way, this gets called, and then you get an array of NS objects of called launch options. And with those launch options, you can do what you need. You've got a function called will resign active. So for instance, if you get a phone call or various other things like that, that's application will resign active. Application did enter background. That's just if someone hits the home button, right? So if someone hits the home button and goes to the home screen, your app by default does not terminate. Terminate is when it's completely closed. Instead, your app enters the background. And you'll notice on your iPhone, if you double click the home button, you can see the apps that are currently backgrounding. Application will enter foreground is when you double click the home button and you hit right back into the app. So that gets called under that. Application did become active. As you can see, it says restarting tasks that were paused while the application was inactive. So in other words, when it resigned active, such as an incoming phone call, it went to become inactive, and then it became active. And then you've got application will terminate, and that's when you double-click the home button, not in the app, and you swipe up to terminate the app. And that's what happens. So oftentimes when you do that, you're going to want to save data so it doesn't get lost. All right. Viewcontroller.swift. So as you can see here, we have the viewcontroller.swift file. This is the main sort of thing you're going to be dealing with first. So for every sort of interface that your user deals with, you'll have a .swift file to deal with that, and for any other object as well. So as you can see, I've got class viewcontroller, UI viewcontroller, which means I'm creating a class called viewcontroller, and it's going to be a subclass of the UI viewcontroller class. You see I've got the view.didLoad function and the didReceiveMemoryWarning function both preloaded in. So the super.view.didLoad obviously calls the view.didLoad method of the super class. And then after that, you can do whatever setup you need to do. So this is as soon as it launches, something happens here. Additionally, you can see we're importing the UI kit. You'll basically need to do that in almost every Swift class that you write. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about user interfaces and that sort of stuff. However, because the length of this tutorial, that's going to be covered in our next tutorial because this is already getting long. But in the meantime, what we're going to go over really quickly is a little bit about the interface and how to get comfortable in the window. So if we go to the .storyboard file, as you can see, we have a list of objects here. For instance, you have a label and a button and a segmenting control, all things that you've seen in the iOS platform before. They're embedded into every app, and they're embedded into all of the default things, such as settings and other things of that nature. And then you can just drag these objects right in. For instance, let's put a map. So I'm going to scroll down, I'm going to find a map kit view, and I'm going to drag it right in. Now it doesn't mean much right now because the map view isn't live, and the reason it's not live is because it's simply too much. It's simply too much for it to render live. So we can pick the type that we want it to default as, and actually they won't be able to change it from within, so we need to pick the one they want. So let's do a hybrid map, we will not allow anything. So we'll allow scrolling, so they can scroll in and out, and we'll show their location, and they can zoom, but they cannot rotate. They cannot do buildings. They cannot do points of interest. And the only reason I'm going to do this for now, and ignore what I'm about to do here, although you might not see it, the reason I'm about to do now is just so you get an idea of how iOS sort of tests your app. So I'm just going to click down here. Sorry, ignore this. And I'm going to do sometimes I'm going to click there.